This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, you're more likely to have a job under a Democratic president, and your pay is likely to go up. How do we know this? Attorney and small business expert Jere Glover has official government data to prove it. The extreme right-wing views of philosopher and novelist Ayn Rand appeal to adolescents of all ages, says her biographer, Professor Jennifer Burns of Stanford University. And Bill Press talks with DNC Communications Director Brad Woodhouse about post-convention bounces. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Jere Glover is a Washington attorney and a small business expert. He also has looked into official government statistics about the economy, and guess what? In Democratic administrations, the economy and business investment are robust. Under Republicans, the economy and business investment go down. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Jere Glover is a Washington attorney who specializes in the role of government regulation of small businesses. Jere has served as the Small Business Administration's chief counsel for advocacy, and before that was CEO of several successful technology-related businesses. He has testified before Congress over 30 times and appeared in over 100 agency proceedings, including rulemakings, adjudications, enforcement proceedings, and others. Jere is also a director of 21st Century Democrats. Jere Glover, thank you for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, now, of course, after that introduction, we don't have time for anything else. No, I'm just kidding. You've compiled a remarkable set of statistics from official government records about economic growth in the United States since World War II. Put into a political context, what do they show about the two parties?
They basically show that the Democrats are much better at running the economy, that no matter what key economic indicator you look at, Democrats do, administrations, the economy does better under Democratic presidents than under Republican presidents.
So why is it that most people think Republicans are better running the economy?
I think they have said that so many times, people actually start to believe it, and nobody really bothers to look at the real numbers.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling to me. Well, of course, a lot of people make decisions based on 30-second commercials too, right? So that can be a problem.
Absolutely.
Now, how can it be that Republicans, allegedly the party of fiscal conservatism, have presided over deficits twice as large as under Democratic administrations?
That boggles my mind. I mean, one, they know they're doing it, and two, the data is all from public sources. This is not something that I make up. It's there, and it's solid and it's clean, and they just keep talking about deficits, but if you talk about something and not do anything about it, they do something. They make them worse.
Now, where is the data that you're getting? Where's it coming from?
Well, there are two primary sources. The one is the economic report of the presidents, and each president puts out an economic report and has for, I don't know, the last 30, 40 years. And the statistical abstract of the United States. There are a couple of little other sources. For example, the number of recessions where the Republicans the presidents have been president during 9 out of 10 recessions. Mm-hmm. That comes from you Google that and it pops up a government source, and the government actually has an official source that lists every single recession and of course, if you go to presidentialdata.org, we have all of those footnoted. This information is so shocking that I didn't think anybody would believe it if I didn't, one, cite it very clearly, and in most cases you can simply click on a link and go right to the data source. It's so contrary to people's perception that we want to make sure that people can find the sources very quickly.
Why haven't the Democrats gotten more of this data out? made it part of the conversation?
That's a good question. And I've obviously talked to a number of Democratic presidential candidates and provided the information to them. In the case of Vice President Gore, he was saving it to use in the debates, and of course, during that time, the economy was so good under President Clinton that no reporter in any of the debates ever mentioned the economy. So that was one of those cases where it was going to be used and simply didn't happen. And I think that the Democrats should have made better use of this through the years.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're speaking with Jere Glover, Washington attorney, director of 21st Century Democrats, former Small Business Administration chief counsel for advocacy, a lot of other things, but we won't go into all that again. What do the figures show about unemployment and job creation in the past 65 years?
Well, they sort of again in the area where you talk about unemployment, the Republicans have much higher unemployment than the Democrats do. For example, when we look at unemployment, we see that the Republicans, on average, unemployment is 5.9% versus 5.4% under Democrats. But when you look at pay increases in pay, you see that the Republicans' pay goes up at 0.37 versus an increase of 0.8 under Democrats. So again, one full unemployment number from 5.0 to 6.2. I make that correction there. So basically, the working person, you're more likely to have a job under Democrat presidents, and your pay is more likely to go up.
Now, what about levels and growth of federal spending under each administration? Does one party kind of spend like a miser, the other spending like a drunken sailor?
Well, it's an interesting phenomena here, because Republicans, talk about the increase in spending, and when you look at the actual hard numbers, the growth in spending is nowhere near what they say it is. And let me just look at that. When you see the growth in spending, the Republicans have increased Democrats have increased $35 billion federal spending versus $70 billion under Republicans. And when you look at the annual increase, you go back to Reagan was 6.8, Bush 1 was 5.4, Clinton went down to 3.5. Bush 2 was 7.8, and Obama is at 6.9. So you look at every single president, and what's important is that it's not just one or two Democratic presidents, or not just one or two Republicans, but you cover the whole gambit of time. And it always still comes out the Republicans increase spending dramatically more than the Democrats do.
And I wonder how many people actually know that. I'm guessing not a lot.
Yeah, and I was an official in the Clinton administration, and it was a conscious decision made by the president to reduce the level of federal spending, and of course also the number of federal employees. And that was, clearly going to be something the president said he was going to accomplish over time, and certainly under the Clinton administration, that those things happened. Mm-hmm. And you hear Republicans talk about it, but when they actually get in control, they don't do anything about it.
Again, we're speaking with Jere Glover, former Small Business Administration chief counsel for advocacy, director of 21st Century Democrats here on americasdemocrats.org. Jere, these statistics from official nonpartisan sources show that business investment grows much more under Democratic administrations than under Republicans. How do you account for that?
I sort of think it's the trickle-down theory doesn't work and never has. And when you look at Republicans, you see that they're trying to do things for the big boys, the big businesses, and the wealthy. And when a Democrat comes in, he's trying to do something for the middle class and for everybody. And quite frankly, the economy generally grows better and improves under Democrats, and businesses put more money into investing in growing their sales increase, and they need to grow their companies and their plants to accommodate the additional growth.
Are Democrats really that much better with budgets, deficits, job creation than Republicans, or are there unusual historical quirks that come into play?
Well, I've sliced and diced the numbers many ways, and if you go to presidentialdata.org and click on Democrats in the economy, you see the background information on each year and each of these things. What I also did is I looked at it in three different. Well, first of all, I looked at it going back 100 years, and quite frankly, you pick up Hoover and you pick up coming out of the Depression. Obviously, the Democrats look infinitely better, so I sort of arbitrarily picked World War II. But I look at the data beginning in 61, from World War II forward, 61 forward, and 81 forward. So no matter where you look at what year you look at, you still find that the same conclusion comes up, is that the Democrats are better. So I think any anomaly or twist or fate of circumstances is pretty well factored into the numbers. And you could argue maybe 1 year was, well, that's a fluke. Well, not when you look at 65 years. Mm-hmm. And the data is the same.
And it all points to policy and the way that you're running things.
Yes, that's correct. It all points to.
Okay. Jere Glover, Washington attorney. He's a former Small Business Administration Chief Counsel for Advocacy, a director of 21st Century Democrats, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Jere, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you. Enjoy talking to you.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going, and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up in just a few minutes, we learn more about Ayn Rand, goddess of the market, from her biographer, who says Rand would not be happy with the Romney-Ryan ticket. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
At last, someone has stood up for America's downtrodden. I mean, of course, the downtrodden Wall Street banks. This defender of fat cat bankers moans that the public anger at the behemoths is unprecedented. He wails that poor Wall Streeters, publicly assailed as greedy, are having to fend off, quote, the misguided idea that we should break up the nation's largest banks. And who is this champion of the Goliaths? William Harrison, the guy who engineered the mergers that created the J.P. Morgan Chase Goliath and became fabulously rich as the conglomerate CEO before retiring in 2006. But Harrison sprang out of retirement this August to write an op-ed piece in the New York Times pleading for public appreciation of bank giantism. He called the consolidation of these financial businesses a natural market-driven evolution toward efficiency, citing Starbucks and big-box retailers like Walmart as models. Bad examples, Bill. Both are relentless predators that profit by devouring the economic vitality of local businesses, employees, suppliers, and whole communities as they stamp their sterile brand of uniformity across the land. Then, the poor guy tumbled headfirst into credibility gulch with a patently preposterous claim that Wall Street does not have, quote, inordinate influence on the political process, nor, he added, does it get huge implicit subsidies from the government. This is Jim Hightower saying, as for his cry that today's public anger at too-big-to-fail banks is unprecedented, Harrison needs a remedial course in American history. My own state's first constitution even outlawed banks. Of course people are angry today. The very banks he's defending, including his, are lawless entities that admit to rigging interest rates, money laundering, fraud, and careless speculation. So yes, bust 'em up.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Everyone is talking about the godmother of economic selfishness, author Ayn Rand, now that one of her disciples, Paul Ryan, could become vice president. Professor Jennifer Burns has written a Rand biography, Goddess of the Market, and says rather than a dream come true, the Romney-Ryan ticket would be Rand's worst nightmare. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Jennifer Burns is an assistant professor of history at Stanford University, where she teaches courses on American political, cultural, and intellectual history. She's also the author of the book Goddess of the Market, Ayn Rand and the American Right, which was based on exclusive access to Rand's personal papers. Professor Jennifer Burns, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, now that Paul Ryan is running for vice president, the philosophy of Ayn Rand is in the forefront of political discussions. For those in our audience who were perhaps not exposed as teenagers to Ayn Rand, can you give a concise summary of what her views were?
Sure. So Rand's mature philosophy is what she called objectivism, and it really had 4 pieces. The first 2 pieces were sort of philosophical in nature. Rand believed in objective reality, and she believed that you could use your reason to understand and decipher the world. So this means specifically that you could not use religious faith, you could not use what she called mysticism. She was a strong believer in reason. And then out of those 2 philosophical principles flowed her belief in what she called the virtue of selfishness. So she was out to create an entirely new moral system, very deliberately, and she felt that this idea of what she called altruism or self-sacrifice was actually immoral, and the moral thing to do as an individual was to pursue your own interests. So in her objectivist worldview, selfishness is considered a virtue. And then the last piece of her ideas was the politics that, again, flows from all of this, and that for her was absolute unregulated laissez-faire capitalism, because only that system is compatible with the virtue of selfishness and with this sort of rational ideal that she held as a philosopher.
You know, you recently wrote that if Mr. Ryan becomes the next vice president, it wouldn't be her dream come true, but her nightmare. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, Rand's ideas have been very influential on the political right, but she was an ideologue and a purist, and she believed in limited government not only in the economic realm, but in every realm. So she was, for instance, even before Roe versus Wade, a strong supporter of a woman's right to choose. And she was absolutely opposed to religion and politics. She thought we have a separation of church and state. It needs to be absolutely clear. You can't muddle the 2 of them. So one of the last things she ever wrote was a denunciation of Ronald Reagan, because he was against abortion, and he was very religious, and he was cozying up to the religious right. This was in the beginning of his career, and she saw that happening, and she thought that was almost worse to have a false friend who might talk about capitalism and talk about limited government, but at the same time be supporting a set of religious ideas that were intrusive and that were dangerous to personal liberty or personal freedom. So she might almost rather deal with a politician, like in her day LBJ, or today maybe Obama, who she knows is not on her team, and rather than one who looks like he might be but really isn't. So I think she would look at Ryan and say, we lost our chance for true capitalism to happen because we have someone who's advocating ideas that sound like capitalism, but he's also advocating a whole host of ideas that are really dangerous for personal freedom and that are going to take us back in time to a place when religion dominates in the public sphere, which should not be a place of religion. It should be a secular open space.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Jennifer Burns, Assistant Professor of History at Stanford University, author of the book Goddess of the Market, Ayn Rand and the American Right. Ayn Rand divided the economic players in America into either producers or moochers. What would she say about the recent Wall Street operators whose taking of wealth from the middle class can only be classified as mooching?
You know, that's a great question because Rand did sort of make this division, and she tended in her novels to talk about mostly her heroes were businessmen or businesswomen, sort of leaders, inventors. She did have a segment of moochers, who were business leaders who colluded with politicians. And she made quite clear that these business leaders did not have any actual competence in the world, and they only got ahead through their political connections. So if you look at Atlas Shrugged, that at the story level, you could definitely take that part of it and say, well, wait a second, Rand might make the same critique of people on Wall Street who don't succeed in their financial speculation and then run to the government for a bailout. And I think she would have been opposed to that bailout, and she would have been felt that they should sort of, in a capitalist system, if you fail, you fail. You don't get to ask for a second chance. Now, on the other hand, one of the speeches she gave again and again during her lifetime was called Big Business, America's Persecuted Minority. And so she tended to look at the businessmen of her days as they could do no wrong and really focus on the politicians rather than the businessmen in collusion with the politicians. So there's a bit of a slippage between what's in her novel and the ideas she sort of promoted. So on the one hand, you could use her ideas to critique the Wall Street bailout. On the other hand, some of her ideas support this heroic idea of capitalists who, bring society forward by pursuing their own self-interest and don't have any obligation beyond that. So I think it kind of goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. Now, as many people know, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Alan Greenspan, was a close personal friend and devotee of Ayn Rand. Did her philosophy affect the way he handled the nation's central bank?
Well, that's another really good question. In Rand's philosophy, there shouldn't have ever been a central bank. She would have preferred we go back to the gold standard. And when pressed about this, Greenspan basically said, I am the new gold standard. Like, I'm going to act in a consistent way that will stabilize the economy the way that gold did. Now, in the wake of the crisis, he made this famous statement about having discovered a flaw in his ideology, and that was about the idea that he thought markets would be self-correcting. And you can see that idea in his very early writings when he was closely associated with Rand. So, for instance, he thought certain regulations on business, be they health or safety, were counterproductive because business should actually be competing on that basis. They should be saying, my product is safer, my product is better, and if the government's making everyone adhere to a certain safety standard, they can't compete on that. So, he had this idea that the market would naturally develop the right kinds of mechanisms to protect consumers and to cater to their every need. So you see that idea from his time with Ayn Rand, and I think that followed through the crisis and through the idea that if things seem to be getting out of hand, well, there's some type of natural mechanism that will bring them back into equilibrium, so we as policymakers don't have to worry too much about getting the rules and getting the incentives right, because the market will naturally do that. So I think that's a very strong connection that you see there.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Ayn Rand's, the person, her immigration to the United States, her bizarre personal life, her writings. What made her so popular, and was she, kind of a cult leader?
Yeah, so let me first offer a slight correction. The way she liked people to pronounce her name was called Ayn Rand. And so Ayn Rand was actually a name she gave herself. She was born Elisa Rosenbaum in Russia, and she lived through the Russian Revolution when her family's property was seized. And that became for her this sort of emblematic example of government, that government action for the common good was actually just a form of theft. So she left Russia, came to the United States. That's when she changed her name to Ayn Rand, a sort of cinematic, theatrical name, began working in Hollywood, writing novels, and over time became very famous and well known for The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And, there's a lot of ways in which these books affect readers. They're pretty famous for people kind of reading them and almost having a conversion experience. And some of it is this sort of heady brew of self-esteem and be true to yourself. Some of it is the politics, absolutely. It gives people an airtight worldview, an ideology, an answer to every question. And she became very popular in the 1960s among young conservatives who were sort of joining, Barry Goldwater's first campaign and beginning to remake the Republican Party into what it is today. A lot of those people, sort of forerunners of Paul Ryan, seized on her work. Now, there was a whole nother set of people who were really interested in her in the 60s for her philosophy and sort of, really got into the technical details of her thought and, believed they were creating this new moral system, this new philosophical system. And so that tight circle in New York that gathered around her, Greenspan among them, had many of the qualities of what we would say is a cult. I mean, adulation of Rand, spending all their time with her, sort of, imitating her taste in clothes and music and, home furnishings and all of this. And she also was having a secret affair with one of these young acolytes who was 25 years younger than her. And so this objectivist world got very big. There were courses on Ayn Rand's philosophy in New York City and across the country. She had her own newsletter. And then eventually it came to light that her lover had another lover, and the whole thing went up in flames. And that was the end of organized objectivism. So there is this really, really interesting backstory. And Rand herself, it's well documented, was not a pleasant person. She was very controlling, very dominating, very, very difficult to be with. And by the end of her life, really had whittled herself down to one close friend and had scared everybody else off. Because if you disagreed with her ideas, she would feel that the friendship could no longer continue. So that made it, in order to be close to her, you had to basically agree with everything she said all the time. And that really didn't work for most people for very long.
That is that's a little wacky.
Yeah, as you can imagine. I mean.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, so there are jokes circulating that between his love of Ayn Rand, and thank you for the correction, of Ayn Rand philosophy and for Led Zeppelin, Paul Ryan is really a 14-year-old boy. What is it about Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead that appeals to young men?
That's a really interesting question. I think it appeals to sort of young people across the spectrum because it creates a very clear and crystal clear world. And it's a world in which people are striving and accomplishing and doing great things. And so on the positive side, that can be very inspiring to people who are looking to sort of make their mark on the world and they haven't yet. And they take Rand's works as kind of an inspiration, kind of a Bible. But a lot of things are missing from them. So there are very few families in her work, and the families that are depicted are almost uniformly negative. So the family is like holding you back. So again, maybe this resonates with a certain aspect of the adolescent male psyche that, if I didn't have this family around, everything would be great. But for people who are more mature and they look at that, they think, wait a second, there are no families, there are no handicapped people, there are no chronically ill people. There are very few people who are just sort of mediocre or average depicted with sympathy. There's a few of them that Rand kind of sprinkles in, but most of them are these hero types. And it may be easy when you're 18 to imagine that you have something in common with this, emotionally stoic, incredibly accomplished, hero who's going to change the world. But that self-concept, I think, doesn't resonate as easily with people who have more experience in the world. That being said, Rand appeals to adolescents of all ages.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Jennifer Burns, assistant professor of history at Stanford University, author of the book Goddess of the Market, Ayn Rand and the American Right. Is it a problem for followers of Ayn Rand to find out that she was an atheist and pro-abortion?
Yeah, Paul Ryan is trying to make it into a problem, as if he sort of just discovered this and now he's not so interested in Rand. In the 1950s and 1960s when she was alive, people were concerned about this, and a lot of conservatives would warn the younger generation away from her because she's an atheist, because she has these ideas. I think today the conservative movement is so much more solidified in its beliefs that Rand seems less threatening. In other words, abortion is not likely to disappear as an issue. The Christian inflection of conservatism is not going to go away. So she made it seem more threatening when all that was being worked out, and now it's a little more like, okay, that's kind of a sideshow to the real important part of Rand, which is how she talks about capitalism and individualism and these, important individualistic values that we need to return to. So it's gotten easier for people to kind of slice away the parts of Rand that they don't like and focus on what they do like. Now, that being said, there are definitely people who it tends to be mostly believing Christians who are reading her and saying this is not right at all. So there's a small undercurrent of protest against the place that she's taking on the right. But like I said, Rand tends to hit people like a conversion experience. So she's got some very enthusiastic supporters, and she, even people who are religious can suddenly find themselves taken by her ideas. So it's one of those interesting complexities.
Very much so, yeah. Jennifer Burns, Assistant Professor of History at Stanford University, author of the book, Goddess of the Market, Ayn Rand and the American Right. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press talks with Brad Woodhouse, spokesman for the Democratic National Committee.
Brad, ran into you down in Charlotte, and you were busy as hell, of course, down there. I think that was the first day of the convention. The day before. It was a Labor Day, I believe. So what was the mission? What was your goal in Charlotte? And do you feel you accomplished it?
Well, look, probably in the deep recesses of our mind, our goal was to do no harm, because we went into that convention with a lead, a small lead, and a lead in most all, if not all, battleground states, or at least tied. And we did better than that. In fact, I think most of the polls show we did far better than do no harm. I mean, and I think these things will settle out. I don't really believe that the fundamentals of the race have changed, but I would rather be us than them. They got no bounce out of their convention. And in fact, their convention ended basically with everyone talking about Clint Eastwood talking to an empty chair. I mean, the next day people weren't talking about Mitt Romney's speech. They were talking about Clint Eastwood, and I think the day after our convention, people were talking about what the president had to say, the choice he laid out, and what the other speakers had to say. I mean, all of our speakers, major speakers, primetime speakers, really were unbelievable. And I think the American people saw the breadth, the diversity of the party, and that we're willing to lay out ideas and talk about our plans in ways that they weren't in Tampa.
I mean, if you look at Michelle Obama, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, you cannot top that. Right. Well, also, if you look, I have to say, if you look at what I said, sort of, let's call them second-tier speakers, although on any other stage they would be first-tier speakers. Right,
exactly.
But each night, there was sort of, I thought, a breakout star. DeVal not taking anything away from any of the others.
Right.
But DeVal Patrick the first night, Emmanuel Cleaver the second night. Yeah. Our own current TV's Jennifer Granholm.
Oh my gosh! I mean, she what an inspiration she was. I mean, that was incredible. Julian Castro with Kino, and I thought one of the other differences. And look, this may explain some. The different favorability ratings between the candidates and the parties. I mean, their convention was, compared to ours, I think mean-spirited. I think it was divisive. It was backwards-looking. And if you listen to someone like Julian Castro and his story and what he had to say at the convention, I mean, it contrasted pretty starkly with Chris Christie's kind of, anger and resentment and divisiveness. And also Chris Christie's speech was more an audition for 2016, and everyone carried the message of why we should reelect the president. In Charlotte, in Tampa, heck, Chris Christie didn't mention Romney until 16 minutes in.
there was a lot of hatred for Barack Obama in Tampa, not a lot of love for Mitt Romney. And in Charlotte, there was nothing but love for Barack Obama.
I think there was a lot of love, admiration, and a lot of people talking about why the president's agenda is right for the country. There was not a lot of that in Tampa. Even Mitt Romney didn't talk about why Mitt Romney's agenda is right for the country. I mean, he gave, Bill Kristol said it just a few days after their convention, he gave no rationale for why he should be elected president. That's right. And it's one of the big criticisms. I mean, not that I am prone to quote Laura Ingraham, but Laura Ingraham said day before yesterday, if they can't do better than what they're doing in terms of communicating message, then they should just pack up and go home.
Well, Laura Ingraham said that. George Will said that.
Right.
Rush Limbaugh said that.
Right.
And now I think Bill Kristol it's already on the stands this week or about to hit with Weekly Standard is saying the same thing, that from their point of view, this should be a slam dunk, right?
Well,
they think, because the economy
correct.
is so bad. But what they see is that they've got a candidate and a party that's not taking advantage of the situation, and which they're almost saying, we're going to lose, and when we do lose, we better just shut down the Republican Party.
Well, I mean, look, to be fair, I think it's easy for these outside commentators. I mean, Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan know this. They know this because they're smart people. We've never said that they're not. They know their numbers don't add up. They know that, and their campaigns even admitted that it would be suicidal to get in to details about their budget and tax plans. Because they don't add up. They favor the wealthy, and they're just the typical trickle-down economics that American people have consistently, once they've felt it, rejected.
And result in getting rid of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
That's exactly right. I mean, you got the champion of privatizing Social Security as the vice presidential candidate. You have the man who actually is the vice presidential candidate who wrote the scheme to voucherize Medicare and eviscerate Medicaid as Bill Clinton so clearly laid out in his convention speech. And so they can't look. On the one hand, the conservative intelligentsia wants them to lay out details. On the other hand, they can't. They can't. Right. I mean, when the details are dissected, it shows what the Tax Policy Center showed, that they want to raise taxes on the middle class.
Brad Woodhouse is the communications director for the Democratic National Committee in studio. Be glad to take your calls at 866-55-PRESS, one of the key people in the Obama campaign. So don't often get a chance to pop your own questions to them. Take advantage of it. So, Brad, now the president, he's going back to Nevada today, then on to Colorado. He's going back to Ohio next week. He just spent a couple of days crisscrossing Florida by bus. The focus now is on the swing states.
That's
Give
right.
us the overview of which states and how's it looking.
Well, I mean, it's not changed a lot since the convention, but I think there are some interesting dynamics. One, we know that the Republicans now, the Romney campaign won't admit this, but they've all but ceded Pennsylvania and Michigan. All the outside groups,
two key states,
which were carrying their water in Pennsylvania and Michigan. This is where some of this pile of outside group money was being spent. They've pulled out, and the Romney campaign, we don't believe is going to pick up the tab for advertising in states that are really increasingly out of reach. I mean, Pennsylvania, I think, was always a stretch for them. The president runs strong there, ran strong there. In Michigan, of course, Mitt Romney said, "Let Detroit go bankrupt." I don't think he'll ever recover. I don't think he'll ever recover from that. Wisconsin is closer than it was in 08. We will win Wisconsin. I don't think there's any doubt. We have out-organized them in Wisconsin. We've got so many offices, staff. One of the top Obama people in the entire orbit, for many years now, runs Trip Weldy runs our operation in Wisconsin, and we're going on the air there, and which was made news last night that well, why are you going on the air there if you think you're so strong? Well, look, we're getting pounded there by outside groups.
Sure,
the Romney campaign is on the air there, and so we're on the air. It's closer than we would like. We've led in 3 of the last 5 polls, and we have a Real Clear Politics average lead of, I think, a couple points or whatever. So it's been a pretty consistent lead. We'll win Wisconsin when it's all said and done. The interesting one, I think, is North Carolina, where if you hear the Republican spin on North Carolina, they should be up from there. We got whatever problems that they perceive in North Carolina. It's a state that they think that they should have and that they think was a fluke that we won. North Carolina will be close, but Bill, we came out of the convention there ahead. We were ahead in some polls.
Yeah.
We were ahead in some polls going in, by a point or 2 points. And I think Real Clear Politics average has it about even or us up by about half a point, if I remember correctly. But in any event, North Carolina is going to be competitive. The fact that they have to fight for North Carolina means that their map is that much more difficult. North Carolina is one that they would like to just check off, and they haven't been able to.
And we've got we'll take a quick break and take your calls, but also we've got Ohio, we have Virginia, we have Colorado, we have New Hampshire, and we've got Nevada, the ones that just pop into my head. By Florida, I know that we talked about Florida yet too.
Yep.
So that's where you're going to see the president and the vice president more and more.
And Bill Clinton was there yesterday.
And Bill Clinton as well. Don't forget him.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Jere Glover, Jennifer Burns, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org